What we saw from Max Verstappen in Canada honestly shouldn't have been possible. On paper, another podium for Red Bull Racing looks completely normal. Fans glance at the final classification, see Verstappen in the top 3, and immediately assume Red Bull had another strong weekend. But the deeper you look into what actually happened during the Canadian Grand Prix weekend in Montreal, the stranger the entire story becomes. Because almost every warning sign pointed toward disaster. The car was unstable, the setup direction was wrong, the tires weren't switching on properly, the RB22 was bouncing violently over the curbs, and Verstappen himself admitted that his feet were literally flying off the pedals. Yet somehow, he still ended up fighting at the front. And honestly, that may reveal something much bigger about Red Bull's 2026 season than the podium itself. Before we dive deeper, make sure to subscribe to and turn on notifications, because we're covering the biggest Formula One drama, analysis, and behind-the-scenes stories all season long. Now, what made this weekend so fascinating wasn't simply the result. It was the contradiction between Verstappen's comments throughout the weekend and the level he still managed to perform at on Sunday. From the very beginning, the mood inside Red Bull didn't sound confident at all. Usually, when Red Bull arrives at a circuit where they expect to dominate, Verstappen sounds calm, controlled, and almost unbeatable. But this time, it was frustration almost immediately. Montreal's Circuit Gilles Villeneuve is one of the most aggressive tracks on the calendar when it comes to curbs and braking zones. Drivers need confidence attacking the curbs because that's where lap time comes from. You have to commit fully into the corners, maximize traction on exit, and trust the car underneath you. But Verstappen never had that trust all weekend. He openly admitted after sprint qualifying that the ride of the car was horrible. The bouncing was so aggressive over the bumps that it physically interrupted his driving inputs. Think about how insane that sounds in modern Formula One. This isn't just discomfort. This is a driver saying the car platform beneath him became unstable enough to actually affect pedal precision. That's a massive problem in a sport where every millisecond matters. But what really shocked people inside the paddock was Verstappen admitting that Red Bull had chosen a setup direction he personally didn't agree with. That almost never happens publicly. Red Bull's entire modern era has basically been built around Verstappen's preferences. The front-end responsiveness, the sharp rotation, the aggressive balance, the team usually trusts Max completely. But in Canada, Verstappen admitted the team wanted to try something different. And his response was incredibly revealing. He basically said, "Fine, go ahead if you think it'll work." Then afterward, he admitted very bluntly that it clearly didn't work. That quote told us a lot, not just frustration, but something deeper. Almost like Verstappen already understood the limits of the RB22 before the weekend even fully started. And despite all of that chaos, he still qualified near the front and stayed in the fight during the race itself. That's where this story becomes less about Red Bull and more about Verstappen individually. Because if the car genuinely lacked balance, struggled with higher temperatures, bounced uncontrollably, and lost performance in certain sections of the track, then why was Verstappen still fighting cars that looked more comfortable all weekend? The answer may be simple. Verstappen is currently operating at a level where he's covering weaknesses the car itself cannot hide anymore. And honestly, we've started seeing this pattern repeatedly throughout 2026. Even when Red Bull no longer looks dominant, Verstappen somehow keeps dragging the car into positions it probably doesn't deserve on pure pace alone. Not through raw speed every lap, but through efficiency, consistency, race management, and an unbelievable understanding of the limit of the car. Canada may have been the clearest example of that so far. One of the most revealing moments came after qualifying when Verstappen admitted he didn't even fully understand where his final lap came from. That sounds bizarre at first, but elite drivers sometimes describe this exact feeling when they're extracting lap time from unstable machinery. Instead of flowing naturally, the lap becomes reactive. You stop driving comfortably and start surviving corner by corner. Every braking zone becomes a correction. Every curb becomes a risk. And yet somehow, the stopwatch still delivers a competitive result. The tire issue made everything even worse. Montreal already has a low-grip surface that makes tire preparation difficult for almost everyone. Even Pirelli admitted teams were struggling to get tires into the correct operating window. But Red Bull seemed especially sensitive. Verstappen repeatedly complained about grip and temperature issues, while technical director Pierre Watch openly admitted the team couldn't consistently put the tire where they wanted it. That's a nightmare in modern Formula One. Today's cars are incredibly dependent on tire stability, battery deployment, traction efficiency, and energy management. If the rear of the car is unstable under braking and the tires aren't prepared correctly, confidence disappears immediately. Normally, that destroys race pace completely. But Verstappen somehow compensated for it lap after lap. Even Lewis Hamilton indirectly revealed how difficult Verstappen was to deal with during the race. Hamilton admitted Ferrari looked stronger through the corners, but Red Bull kept recovering time on the straight. However, Verstappen himself had already explained earlier in the weekend that Red Bull wasn't even achieving its normal straight-line advantage consistently. Canada exposed that perfectly. Even the team itself seemed uncertain about setup direction. Verstappen wanted one approach. The engineers believed another solution would work better. The result, a car that never truly came alive all weekend. And yet Verstappen still delivered a podium. That's why this performance deserves to be viewed differently from a normal P3 finish. Because honestly, if you removed Verstappen entirely and judged the RB22 purely on behavior and balance throughout the weekend, it probably looked like only the fourth best package at times. Ferrari looked more balanced, Mercedes looked more stable. Even McLaren had serious pace despite strategic mistakes. But Verstappen continuously compressed the performance gap through execution alone. And that's exactly what truly elite drivers do at their peak. They minimize the weaknesses of imperfect machinery. Even Laurent Mekies indirectly defended Verstappen afterward by explaining that Max simply wants Formula One drivers to push naturally and aggressively again rather than constantly managing systems inside the cockpit. That quote explains everything we saw in Canada. Verstappen still wants to attack instinctively, but modern Formula One increasingly forces him into management mode instead. And despite all the frustration, despite the bouncing, despite the setup disagreement, despite the tire struggles, despite the lack of confidence in the car, Verstappen still walked away with a podium. Not because Red Bull gave him the easiest car on the grid, but because Verstappen once again extracted performance from conditions that realistically shouldn't have produced that result. And honestly, maybe that is the real story of Red Bull's 2026 season. Not whether Verstappen can still win races, everyone already knows he can. But whether Red Bull has quietly reached the point where Verstappen is covering more of the car's weaknesses than the team would ever publicly admit. Because if the RB22 keeps behaving like this, and Verstappen still keeps dragging it to the front, then eventually Formula One fans are going to start asking a very uncomfortable question. How much of Red Bull's competitiveness actually belongs to the car anymore? And how much belongs purely to Max Verstappen? What do you think? Is Verstappen currently driving beyond the true limit of the RB22? Or is Red Bull secretly much closer to solving its problems than fans realize? Let me know in the comments below.